The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red uniform for what he believed would be another routine day. At 42 years old, James had served the royal family for nearly 20 years, standing guard through countless ceremonies, state visits, and public appearances. His weathered hands gripped his rifle with practiced ease, and his steel-gray eyes surveyed the grounds with the alertness that had earned him 3 commendations for excellence. James came from a military family in Yorkshire, where his father had worked in the coal mines, and his mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. The army had offered him a way out of poverty, and the Queen's Guard had given him purpose and pride. He wore his bearskin hat and red tunic like armor, protecting not just the royal family, but also his own sense of worth and belonging. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, the castle buzzed with more activity than usual. Prince George, now 10 years old, was scheduled to visit with his tutors for a special history lesson about his ancestors. The young prince had been studying the monarchy's role in British history, and the castle staff had arranged for him to see some family artifacts and portraits that weren't usually on public display. James had seen Prince George many times before during official events, but always from a distance. The boy seemed polite and well-mannered, much like his father Prince William had been at that age. However, James had noticed something different about Prince George in recent months. The child appeared more thoughtful, more aware of the people around him than typical for someone his age. As James took his position near the main entrance, he couldn't help but think about his own son, David, who was the same age as Prince George. David lived with James's ex-wife in Manchester, and James only saw him every other weekend due to his demanding schedule at the palace. The divorce had been difficult, with Sarah citing James's dedication to his job as one of the reasons their marriage fell apart. She had wanted a husband who would be home for dinner and bedtime stories, not someone whose first loyalty was to the crown. The irony wasn't lost on James that he spent more time protecting someone else's child than being with his own. Sometimes, during the long hours of standing at attention, he wondered if his service was worth the personal cost. His father had often said that duty comes before everything else, but lately, James questioned whether his father had been right. The sound of approaching footsteps broke James from his thoughts. Prince George appeared around the corner, walking alongside his private secretary and 2 tutors. The young prince wore a navy blazer and gray trousers, looking every inch the future king he was destined to become. His blonde hair was neatly combed, and his blue eyes sparkled with curiosity about the day's activities. As the group approached James's position, something unexpected happened. Prince George stopped walking and looked directly at James, making eye contact in a way that was both confident and respectful. Most people, even adults, tended to look through the guards as if they were part of the architecture rather than human beings. But Prince George saw him, really saw him. The young prince whispered something to his private secretary, who nodded and stepped back slightly. Prince George then walked directly up to James, who remained at attention but felt his heart rate quicken. In all his years of service, no member of the royal family had ever approached him directly during his guard duty, except for official inspections. "Good morning," Prince George said quietly, his voice carrying the careful diction he had been taught, but also genuine warmth. "I hope you're having a good day." James was trained to remain silent while on guard duty unless directly questioned by a senior royal or in case of emergency. But something in the young prince's manner suggested this was more than casual conversation. The boy seemed to be waiting for a response, not because protocol demanded it, but because he genuinely wanted to connect. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," James replied softly, maintaining his position but allowing a slight smile to cross his usually stoic features. "Thank you for asking." Prince George nodded, and then said something that completely caught James off guard. "My father told me that you have a son about my age. I hope he's doing well." James felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. The fact that Prince William had mentioned David to his son, and that Prince George had remembered and cared enough to ask about him, touched something deep within the guard's heart. For years, James had felt like an invisible protector, important but unnoticed. This simple acknowledgement made him feel seen and valued as a person, not just as a uniformed guardian. "He is well, thank you, Your Royal Highness," James managed to say, though his voice was slightly rougher than usual. "That's very kind of you to ask." Prince George smiled, a genuine expression that lit up his young face. "I'm glad to hear it. I know how much fathers love their children, even when duty keeps them apart sometimes." The words hit James like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were so perceptive and compassionate. This 10-year-old boy had somehow understood the sacrifice that James made every day, the internal struggle between duty and family that kept the guard awake at night. It was as if Prince George could see straight into James's heart and recognize the pain he carried. The private secretary cleared his throat gently, indicating that the schedule needed to continue, but Prince George held up a small hand. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope with his initials embossed in gold. "I wrote something for you," Prince George said, offering the envelope to James. "You don't have to read it now, but I wanted you to have it." James looked at the envelope, then at the young prince's earnest face. Breaking protocol, he carefully took the envelope with his free hand, tucking it into his uniform jacket. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. I'm honored." Prince George nodded solemnly, then rejoined his group and continued into the castle. James resumed his rigid stance, but his mind was racing. The weight of the envelope against his chest felt significant, like a bridge between his two worlds, the formal world of royal duty and the personal world of fatherhood and emotion. As the morning progressed, James found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on his duties. The envelope seemed to burn against his chest, and he kept thinking about Prince George's words and the kindness in the boy's eyes. Several times, other staff members walked past, and James wondered if they could tell that something had changed, that a simple conversation had somehow shifted his entire perspective on his role and his life. When James's shift ended at 6 o'clock that evening, he walked to his small quarters in the staff wing of the castle with unusual haste. His hands trembled slightly as he removed his uniform jacket and carefully extracted the envelope Prince George had given him. The cream-colored paper felt expensive between his fingers, and the gold-embossed initials caught the lamplight as he turned it over. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed and opened the envelope with the reverence one might show to a historical document. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper, covered in Prince George's careful handwriting. The letter was written in blue ink, with the kind of penmanship that spoke of excellent tutoring and natural care. "Dear Sergeant Mitchell," the letter began, "I wanted to write to you because my father and grandfather have taught me that the people who protect our family are heroes, even though they don't always get thanked properly. I know that you stand outside in all kinds of weather, and that you miss time with your own family to take care of mine. I want you to know that I see you, and I'm grateful for everything you do." James had to pause in his reading as his eyes filled with tears. No one had ever called him a hero before, certainly not a member of the royal family. In his working-class upbringing, heroes were soldiers who died in wars or firefighters who saved lives. He had always thought of himself as simply doing his job, earning his paycheck, and serving his country in the only way he knew how. The letter continued, "My father told me that your son David is very smart and loves football, just like I do. I know it must be hard to be away from him so much. I asked my tutors about it, and they explained that sometimes parents have to make difficult choices to provide for their children. I think you're very brave for making that choice." James wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, overwhelmed by the maturity and empathy in the young prince's words. At 10 years old, Prince George had grasped something that many adults failed to understand, that James's absence from his son's daily life wasn't because he didn't care, but because he cared so much that he was willing to sacrifice his own happiness for David's future. "I have an idea," the letter went on, "and I hope it's okay that I'm suggesting it. There's a football match next month between the castle staff and some local players. It's just for fun, and family members are invited to watch. I wondered if David might like to come and see where you work. I would be very happy to meet him, and maybe we could kick a football around together if he wants to." James's breath caught in his throat. The annual staff football match was indeed coming up, a tradition that the royal family had started years ago to boost morale and show appreciation for the castle workers. James had never attended because he usually spent his free weekends with David in Manchester, but the matches always fell on weekends when David was with his mother. The invitation to bring David to the castle, extended personally by Prince George, was extraordinary. It would give his son a chance to see where his father worked and understand the importance of his role. More than that, it would show David that his father's job wasn't just standing around in a fancy uniform, but actually protecting people who valued and respected him. The letter concluded, "I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous. My mother says that word means suggesting something I shouldn't suggest. But I really would like to meet David, and I think it would be nice for him to see how important his father is to our family. Please think about it, and let my private secretary know if you would like to arrange it. With admiration and gratitude, George. James read the letter 3 more times, each reading revealing new layers of thoughtfulness and consideration. The fact that Prince George had taken the time to learn about David, to think about James's situation, and to come up with a solution showed remarkable emotional intelligence for someone so young. That night, James called his ex-wife Sarah for the first time in months outside of their usual weekend arrangement discussions. Their conversation was initially awkward, as it always was, but when James explained about Prince George's letter and invitation, Sarah's tone changed completely. He really wrote that? Sarah asked, her voice soft with surprise. A 10-year-old prince thought about our David and wanted to help. He did, James confirmed, reading portions of the letter aloud to her. Sarah, I know things have been difficult between us, and I know I haven't been the husband or father you wanted me to be. But this invitation, it could help David understand why I do what I do. There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again. David has been asking more questions about your job lately. He told his teacher that his father protects the queen, but some of the other children didn't believe him. This would certainly show them he was telling the truth. They talked for over an hour, the longest conversation they'd had since the divorce was finalized 2 years earlier. Sarah admitted that she had sometimes wondered if she had been too harsh in her judgment of James's career choice. She had been so focused on what his absence cost their family that she hadn't fully appreciated what his service meant to him and to the country. I can see now that it's not just a job for you, Sarah said finally. It's who you are, isn't it? And if a member of the royal family can see that and value it enough to reach out to our son, then maybe I need to look at it differently too. James felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. For years, he had felt torn between two identities, the dutiful soldier and the loving father. Prince George's letter had somehow bridged that gap, showing him that he could be both without apology. The next morning, James requested a meeting with Prince George's private secretary. The man, a courteous gentleman in his 50s named Mr. Hartley, received James in a small office overlooking the castle gardens. James had never been in this part of the castle before, and he was struck by how normal it felt despite the historical significance of the surroundings. His Royal Highness was hoping you would accept his invitation, Mr. Hartley said with a warm smile. He's quite taken with the idea of meeting your son. He doesn't often get to spend time with children his own age outside of very formal settings. James nodded, still somewhat overwhelmed by the entire situation. I'm honored by His Royal Highness's thoughtfulness. My ex-wife and I have discussed it, and we would very much like David to attend the football match. Mr. Hartley made some notes in a leather-bound planner. Excellent. We'll arrange for proper security clearance and send you the details. His Royal Highness also mentioned that he has some football trading cards he thought David might enjoy. Apparently, they share a favorite team. Manchester United, James confirmed with a smile. David has supported them since he was old enough to understand what football was. As does His Royal Highness, Mr. Hartley said with a knowing look. I believe they'll get along quite well. As James left the meeting, he felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since his divorce, he was looking forward to an event that would bring together both sides of his life. Prince George had somehow understood what James needed before James himself had realized it. A way to show his son that his father's sacrifice had meaning and value. The 2 weeks leading up to the football match passed slowly for James, who found himself more nervous than he had been since his first day as a royal guard. He spoke to David on the phone every few days, and his son's excitement grew with each conversation. David had told all his friends at school about the invitation, and his teacher had even used it as an opportunity for the class to learn about the royal family and the role of the guards. Dad, will I really get to meet a prince? David asked during one of their calls, his voice filled with wonder. What should I say to him? Mom says I should practice my manners. James smiled at his son's concern. Just be yourself, David. His Royal Highness is very kind, and I think he's looking forward to meeting you as much as you're looking forward to meeting him. Will you be wearing your big hat? David asked, referring to the iconic bearskin hat of the Queen's Guard. Not during the football match, James laughed. I'll be wearing regular football kit, just like you do for your school team. The conversation reminded James of how rarely David got to see him in civilian clothes. Their weekend visits usually involved trips to parks or museums, activities where James wore casual clothes. David had only seen his father in his ceremonial uniform during official events that were televised, and James realized that his son probably had little understanding of what his daily work actually involved. On the morning of the match, James drove to Manchester to pick up David. Sarah had dressed their son in his best Manchester United jersey and had clearly spent extra time on his hair. She handed James a small bag with David's overnight things, as they had arranged for David to spend the weekend at the castle in one of the family guest rooms. "He's been talking about nothing else for days," Sarah said quietly as David ran back inside to get his football boots. "James, this means more to him than you might realize. He's been dealing with some teasing at school about your job. Some of the other children said he was making it up, that guards don't really protect the royal family." James felt a pang of guilt that his son had been facing doubt and mockery because of him. "I had no idea. He never mentioned it. He didn't want to worry you," Sarah explained. "But this invitation from Prince George, it's going to mean everything to him. And, to be honest, it means a lot to me too. I can see now that what you do is important, not just to the country, but to the royal family personally." During the drive back to Windsor, David peppered his father with questions about the castle, the other guards, and Prince George. James found himself sharing stories about his work that he had never told his son before. The long hours of training, the pride he felt in his uniform, the sense of history that surrounded him every day. "Do you ever get scared, Dad?" David asked as they approached the castle gates. James considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I get nervous, especially during big events with lots of people. But I'm trained to handle those feelings, and I know that what I'm doing is important. When you believe in something bigger than yourself, it gives you courage." The security check at the castle gates was thorough but respectful, and David was clearly impressed by the formality of the process. As they drove through the grounds, David pressed his face to the window, taking in the massive stone buildings and manicured gardens. "It's like a fairy tale," David whispered, and James felt a surge of pride that his workplace could inspire such awe in his son. They were met by Mr. Hartley, who greeted David with the same courtesy he would show any important visitor. "Master David," he said formally, "His Royal Highness Prince George is very much looking forward to meeting you. But first, would you like a quick tour of where your father works?" The tour was unlike anything James had ever experienced at the castle. Mr. Hartley showed David the guardroom, explained the different uniforms and their significance, and even allowed David to try on a spare bearskin hat. David's eyes grew wide as he struggled with the weight of the ceremonial headgear. "Your father wears this for hours at a time," Mr. Hartley explained. "It takes considerable strength and discipline." David looked at his father with new respect, finally, understanding the physical demands of the job he had only seen on television. James felt emotional watching his son discover the reality of his profession, seeing the pride replace the confusion in David's eyes. When they arrived at the football pitch, a modest field behind the castle where staff members often played informal games, David spotted Prince George immediately. The young prince was warming up with some of the other players, wearing a simple blue football kit, and looking like any other 10-year-old boy excited about a game. Prince George jogged over when he saw them arrive, and James felt his heart rate increase. This was the moment he had been anticipating and dreading, the meeting between his two worlds. "You must be David," Prince George said with a genuine smile, extending his hand for a proper handshake. "I'm George. Your dad has told me a lot about you." David shook the prince's hand somewhat shyly, but managed to find his voice. "It's nice to meet you, Your Royal Highness. Thank you for inviting me." "Just call me George," the prince said easily. "We're here to play football, not worry about titles. I heard you support Manchester United too." David's shyness melted away as he nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Marcus Rashford is my favorite player." "Mine too," Prince George exclaimed, and James watched in amazement as the two boys immediately launched into an animated discussion about football statistics and recent matches. The game itself was informal and fun, with castle staff members ranging in age from 20 to 60 participating alongside some local players from the nearby village. James played defense, and he was surprised by how good Prince George was at football. The boy had clearly received excellent coaching, but more than that, he played with intelligence and consideration for his teammates. During halftime, Prince George approached James on the sideline. "Your son is really good at football," he said, gesturing to where David was juggling the ball with some of the other young players. "And he seems very proud of you." James looked over at David, who was indeed glowing with happiness and excitement. "This has been incredibly kind of you, Your Royal Highness. You've given him something he'll remember for the rest of his life." Prince George shrugged modestly. He should be proud of his father. What you do matters, Sergeant Mitchell. Sometimes I think the adults forget to tell you that, so I wanted to make sure David knew it. The simple wisdom in the young prince's words struck James deeply. Prince George was right. In the formal world of royal protocol and military duty, expressions of personal appreciation were rare. The job was supposed to be its own reward, but everyone needed to feel valued and seen as a human being, not just a uniformed function. After the match, which ended in a friendly draw, Prince George presented David with a signed Manchester United jersey and a collection of football trading cards. But more than the gifts, he spent time talking with David about school, his interests, and his hopes for the future. Maybe you'll want to serve the country like your father when you're older, Prince George suggested. There are many ways to do it, in the military, in government, or in community service. The important thing is finding something you believe in. David nodded seriously, clearly taking the advice to heart. I want to make my dad proud, like he makes me proud. James felt tears pricking his eyes at his son's words. All the long hours, the missed bedtime stories, the weekends spent apart, suddenly, it all felt worthwhile. David understood now, in a way that James had never been able to explain, why his father's work mattered. That evening, as David slept in one of the guest rooms, James found himself walking the castle grounds with a peace he hadn't felt in years. The weight of the letter in his pocket, he had taken to carrying it with him every day, felt like a talisman against the doubts that had plagued him since his divorce. The next morning brought an unexpected request. Mr. Hartley approached James during his morning briefing with news that Prince George would like to speak with him privately before David woke up. James found the young prince in the castle library, a magnificent room lined with ancient books and lit by tall windows that cast golden light across the Persian rugs. "Good morning, Sergeant Mitchell," Prince George said formally, then gestured for James to sit in one of the leather chairs. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." James sat carefully, still adjusting to the surreal experience of having personal conversations with a member of the royal family. "Of course, Your Royal Highness." Prince George picked up a book from the table beside him, a photo album that James recognized as one of the official records of royal events. "I was looking at pictures from my grandfather's coronation last year," Prince George said, opening the album to a specific page. "And I found this." The photograph showed King Charles during the coronation ceremony, but Prince George's finger was pointing to the background, where James could be seen standing at attention in his ceremonial uniform. James was barely visible in the image, just one of dozens of guards forming a protective perimeter around the ceremony. "My grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth, once told my father that the people you can trust most are the ones who do their duty without seeking recognition," Prince George continued. "She said that the guards and staff who serve our family year after year, through all kinds of weather and circumstances, are the backbone of the monarchy." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your Royal Highness, I'm honored to serve. It's been my privilege for 20 years. "I know it has been," Prince George said seriously. "And I've been thinking about what my grandmother would want me to do with that knowledge. She believed that service should be recognized, even if it's not always public recognition." Prince George closed the photo album and stood up, walking to one of the tall windows that overlooked the castle grounds. "I've spoken with my father about your service record. Did you know that you've never taken a sick day in 20 years? That you volunteered for extra duty during every major royal event, including my great-grandmother's funeral when many staff members were given time off for emotional reasons?" James hadn't realized that his service record was being reviewed, and the attention made him somewhat uncomfortable. "I was just doing my job, Your Royal Highness." "No," Prince George said firmly, turning back to face James. "You were doing much more than your job. And yesterday, watching you with David, I understood something else. You've been sacrificing time with your own family to protect mine. That's not something that should go unnoticed." The young prince walked to an ornate desk and picked up an envelope bearing the royal seal. "This is a letter of commendation from my father, recognizing your exceptional service. It will be placed in your permanent record, and it comes with a promotion to senior sergeant and a significant increase in salary." James stared at the envelope, too shocked to speak. Promotions in the Queen's Guard were rare and typically came only after decades of service or exceptional circumstances. The financial implications alone would change his life dramatically. He would be able to afford a larger apartment, maybe even help with David's education in ways he had never imagined possible. "But that's not the most important part," Prince George continued. "I've also arranged for you to have a new duty schedule. Instead of working 7 days a week with occasional leave, you'll work 5 days and have every weekend off. This means you can spend every weekend with David, and you'll have regular holidays too. James felt his legs grow weak, and he had to sit down again. Your Royal Highness, I don't know what to say. This is more than I ever expected. My father was initially concerned that reducing your hours might affect security, Prince George said with a slight smile. But I pointed out that a guard who gets proper rest and time with his family is probably more alert and dedicated than one who's exhausted and missing his son. He agreed. The wisdom in the 10-year-old's reasoning was remarkable, but James was beginning to understand that Prince George possessed an unusual combination of intelligence and empathy. The boy had identified a problem, James's work-life balance, and had found a solution that benefited everyone involved. There's one more thing, Prince George said, returning to his chair. I'd like David to visit the castle regularly, maybe once a month. Not for special events, just for normal visits. I don't get to spend much time with other children, and I think David and I could be good friends. James realized that Prince George's generosity extended beyond professional considerations. The young prince was genuinely lonely, surrounded by adults and formal protocols, and he had found a kindred spirit in David. Their shared love of football and their similar ages had created a natural connection that both boys seemed to value. I would be honored to arrange that, Your Royal Highness, James said. David would be thrilled. He hasn't stopped talking about yesterday since it happened. When David woke up and joined them for breakfast in one of the smaller dining rooms, Prince George shared the news about the regular visits. David's reaction was pure joy. He actually jumped up from his chair and did a little dance around the room, which made Prince George laugh with genuine delight. Can we play football every time? David asked excitedly. Of course, Prince George replied. And maybe I can teach you some of the things my tutors have taught me about history and languages. Did you know that I'm learning French and Spanish? James watched the interaction between the two boys and marveled at how naturally they communicated. There was none of the awkwardness that might be expected between a future king and the son of a working-class guard. They were simply two 10-year-old boys who enjoyed each other's company. As the weekend drew to a close, James reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few days. The promotion and new schedule would allow him to be a more present father while still serving his country with honor. More importantly, David now understood the significance of his father's work and felt proud rather than confused about James's career. During the drive back to Manchester, David chattered excitedly about all the things he had seen and done. But, as they neared Sarah's house, he grew quieter and more thoughtful. Dad, David said finally, I'm sorry I sometimes got upset about you not being home more often. I didn't understand before that your job was so important. James pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to look at his son. David, you never have to apologize for wanting to spend time with me. That's normal and healthy. And you know what? Prince George helped me realize that I can do my job well and still be a good father. I'm going to be around a lot more from now on. David's face lit up with happiness. Really? Every weekend, James confirmed. And holidays too. We're going to have so much more time together. As they hugged in the car, James thought about the extraordinary chain of events that had started with Prince George's simple gesture of recognition. A 10-year-old boy had seen what many adults had missed, that dedication and sacrifice deserved acknowledgement, and that small acts of kindness could transform lives in unexpected ways. 6 months after that life-changing weekend, James Mitchell stood at his post outside Windsor Castle with a profound sense of contentment he had never experienced before. His new schedule had transformed not only his relationship with David, but his entire outlook on life. Every Friday evening, he drove to Manchester with the anticipation of a father who knew he would have 2 full days to spend with his son. Every Monday morning, he returned to work refreshed and motivated, carrying with him the joy of weekend adventures and meaningful conversations. The changes in David had been remarkable. The boy who had once been quiet and sometimes resentful about his father's absence had blossomed into a confident young man who spoke proudly about his father's service. David's grades at school had improved, and his teacher had commented on his increased self-esteem and leadership qualities. When children at school occasionally doubted his stories about visiting the castle, David would simply smile and change the subject, secure in the knowledge of his unique friendship with Prince George. The monthly visits to Windsor Castle had become the highlight of both boys' lives. Prince George had proven to be not just a gracious host, but a genuine friend to David. They spent their time together playing football, exploring the castle grounds, and engaging in surprisingly deep conversations about their hopes for the future. James often watched them from a distance, marveling at how naturally they communicated despite their vastly different backgrounds. During one particularly memorable visit, Prince George had shown David the throne room and explained the history behind the coronation chair. David had listened with fascination, asking thoughtful questions about the responsibilities that would one day rest on George's shoulders. Their conversation had revealed a maturity in both boys that impressed the adults who overheard it. "Sometimes I worry about becoming king," Prince George had confided to David during that visit. "It's a lot of responsibility, and I want to do it well." David had responded with the practical wisdom of a child who understood hard work and dedication. "My dad says that if you prepare properly and work hard, you can handle any responsibility. And you have lots of time to learn before you actually become king." The friendship had also had unexpected benefits for Prince George's education. His tutors had noticed that he was more engaged in his studies, particularly in history and current affairs. When asked about the change, Prince George had explained that talking with David about normal life in Britain had helped him understand the real-world implications of royal duties and government policies. James's relationship with Sarah had also improved dramatically. The promotion and better schedule had relieved much of the financial stress that had contributed to their marital problems, and Sarah had gained a new appreciation for James's commitment to his work. While they remained divorced, they had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and their shared love for David. "I owe Prince George an apology," Sarah had said during one of their regular co-parenting conversations. "I never understood that your job wasn't just about standing around in a uniform. Seeing how much he values what you do has made me realize how unfairly I judged your career." The ripple effects of Prince George's initial gesture had extended beyond James's immediate family. Other guards had noticed the change in James's demeanor and energy, and when they learned about his promotion and new schedule, it had sparked conversations about work-life balance throughout the castle staff. Within 6 months, the administration had implemented a new policy ensuring that all guards received regular time off and mental health support. James had also become something of a mentor to younger guards who were struggling with the demands of the job. He shared his experience of finding balance between duty and family, and he always carried Prince George's original letter with him as a reminder of the importance of recognizing the humanity in everyone, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. On this particular spring morning, as James stood at his familiar post, he reflected on how a single moment of kindness had created waves of positive change that continued to spread. Prince George, now 11 years old, had grown into his role as a future king with remarkable grace, and his natural empathy and wisdom suggested that the monarchy would be in good hands when his time came to serve. The sound of familiar voices broke James from his thoughts, and he looked up to see Prince George walking across the courtyard with David at his side. This wasn't one of their scheduled monthly visits, but rather a surprise appearance that David had arranged as part of a school project about different careers. Prince George had volunteered to help David present his project to the class via video call, and they were planning to film it in the castle gardens. "Good morning, Dad," David called out with a bright smile, his confidence and happiness evident in every step. "Good morning, Sergeant Mitchell," Prince George added formally, but with the warmth that had characterized all their interactions since that first letter. As James watched the two boys set up their camera equipment and begin practicing their presentation about royal guards and their important role in British society, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought him to this moment. Prince George's simple act of recognition had not only changed James's life, but had created a lasting friendship between two remarkable young people who would carry the lessons they learned from each other into their futures. The presentation itself was impressive, with David explaining the history and duties of the Queen's Guard while Prince George provided historical context and emphasized the personal qualities required for such service. When they finished filming, both boys were glowing with pride at their collaborative effort. "Thank you for helping me with this project, George," David said as they packed up their equipment. "Thank you for choosing to present about your father's work," Prince George replied. "I think it's important for people to understand how much the guards do for our family and our country." Later that afternoon, as James walked with both boys through the castle gardens, Prince George pulled him aside for a private conversation. "Sergeant Mitchell, I wanted you to know that spending time with David has taught me a lot about leadership and responsibility. He talks about you often, and I can see how much he's learned from your example about duty and service." James felt his eyes moisten with tears of pride and Gratitude. Your Royal Highness, I can't thank you enough for what you've done for my family. Your kindness changed our lives in ways I never could have imagined. Prince George shook his head modestly. I think we've helped each other, actually. Having a friend like David has made me a better person and a better future king. Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected places. As the day drew to a close and James prepared to drive David back to Manchester for the school week, he reflected on the profound truth in Prince George's words. The young prince had learned about real life and genuine friendship from his relationship with David, while David had gained confidence, pride in his father, and an understanding of service and duty that would shape his character for years to come. 6 months earlier, James had been a dedicated but emotionally isolated guard, torn between his duty to his country and his love for his son. Today, he was a man who had found balance and peace, thanks to the extraordinary kindness and wisdom of a 10-year-old prince who understood that true leadership begins with seeing and valuing the people around you. As they drove home through the English countryside, David fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted from an exciting day. James glanced at his son's peaceful face and then at the letter from Prince George that still resided in his jacket pocket, and he smiled with the deep contentment of a man who had learned that sometimes the most profound changes in life begin with the simplest acts of human kindness and recognition. The story of Sergeant James Mitchell and Prince George would continue to inspire others within the castle walls and beyond, proving that when people in positions of privilege take time to acknowledge and value those who serve them, the resulting bonds of respect and friendship can transform lives in beautiful and lasting ways. In years to come, as Prince George grew into his destiny as king, he would carry with him the lessons learned from a guard's son about empathy, genuine connection, and the importance of seeing the humanity in every person he encountered.